After years of following leads and searching for answers, Arlington police believe they have finally found the person responsible for a murder in 2012. Scoop Jefferson just heard from the detectives who made the breakthrough.
Even after years of investigating murders, the detective in this cold case fought back tears, sharing the moment she contacted the family, telling them their loved one's killer had been found.
A woman was stabbed over 100 times inside her own apartment in Texas by someone she trusted enough to open her door for, late at night, without hesitation. 10 seconds at that door. That's all it took. A knock, a few words, and she let them in. The security camera above her landing recorded every second of it. For 14 years, nobody could tell you who that was. But here's what makes this case so hard to accept. Police had that footage from the very first morning. They watched it. They released it publicly. But they still couldn't put a name to the person standing at her door. And the reason isn't what you'd expect. It wasn't a botched investigation or a lost file. The killer left behind one drop of blood, and when investigators ran it through every criminal database in the United States, it came back with absolutely nothing. Not because the system failed, because the person who left it had never been arrested for anything in her life. On paper, she was exactly the kind of person nobody would ever suspect. So while a family spent over a decade waiting for a name, the woman police now accuse of this was doing something almost harder to stomach than hiding. She wasn't hiding. She was building a life. A real estate career, a marriage, children, vacations abroad, a few miles from the apartment where it happened. In the end, it took a DNA database built for people researching their own ancestry, a family tree traced across 2 years of work, and a lunch left unfinished on a restaurant table to do what 14 years of investigation could not. But behind every breakthrough in this case is a family that spent 14 years waking up every morning without answers. This is the story of Irasema Chavez, the single drop of blood that outlasted everything else about that night, and the woman who spent 14 years looking completely ordinary. And it ends with 2 plastic forks, a plate, and a cup, collected in the seconds after she walked away. Welcome to Missing Hour, where the cases everyone else gave up on get dug back up. If you're new, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. And to everyone who's already here, thank you, sincerely, for every share, like, and comment that's helped these cases reach the people who needed to hear them. Irasema Chavez wasn't from Texas. She grew up in Mexico, and in the years before her death, she made the same decision millions of people make, to start over somewhere new. Her sister and brother-in-law had already settled in the Dallas, Fort Worth area, so that's where she went. She moved into her own apartment at the Aspenwood complex, in the 2700 block of South Collins Street in Arlington, a second-floor unit, close to family, the beginning of a new chapter in a new country. She was 32 years old enough to have already built a life somewhere else, young enough that most of what came next should have still been in front of her. And by every account, she was making the most of it. According to her brother-in-law, Irasema had built a wide circle of new friends since arriving in Arlington. Shortly before her death, she had also come out to her family and friends as a lesbian. This was a woman finally living openly, in a new country, surrounded by people she had chosen for herself. To the people who knew her, Irasema wasn't the kind of person who stayed home every weekend. She loved dancing, loved being around friends, and after moving to Texas, she had finally begun creating a life that felt entirely her own. She had family nearby, people she trusted, and for the first time, she could live openly without hiding who she was. It finally felt like life was beginning. Then, in a single night, everything she had worked so hard to build was taken away. But there's one more detail worth holding on to before Irasema died. In 2011, the year before she died, someone slashed a tire on her vehicle. Irasema found this disturbing and responded by installing security cameras outside her apartment. She wanted to feel safe in her own home. Those cameras are the only reason anyone knows anything at all about what happened on her final night. It's January 2012. Gas prices are climbing. Obama is in his fourth year. And across North Texas, complexes like Aspen would fill with exactly the kind of people Irasema was. Recent arrivals, families split across two countries, everyone trying to build something stable in a place that still feels new. Now you might be wondering, if police had the killer on camera from the very first day, how does a case like this stay unsolved for 14 years? Hold on to that question, because it only gets strange from here. Stay with us, because what this case reveals about how completely a killer can disappear into an ordinary life will change how you think about every unsolved case you've ever heard about. On the evening of January 19th, 2012, Irasema came home. The camera recorded her arriving, the way it had recorded her arriving countless times before. At around 9:30 that night, she called her sister. She asked whether her sister and her niece, who was visiting from Mexico, would come over and stay with her. Her sister said no. It was late, and she didn't want to make the drive at that hour. She offered instead for Irasema to come to her place. Irasema declined, and they agreed to see each other in the morning. That's a phone call her family has carried for 14 years. A completely ordinary conversation that, without anyone realizing it, became the last one they would ever have with Irasema. A perfectly ordinary decision, made for perfectly ordinary reasons, on the one night it mattered. At 11:29 p.m., roughly 4 hours after Irasema got home, the camera above her landing recorded a figure in baggy sweatpants and a hooded sweatshirt climbing the stairs to her door. The figure knocks, and then stands there for over a minute, waiting at the door. And then the door opens from the inside, and Irasema lets the person in. 11 minutes later, at around 11:40 p.m., the power to her surveillance system is disconnected. The recording stops. Whoever was inside that apartment knew the cameras were there, knew where the receiver was, and knew enough to shut it down. Think about what that means, watched back years later, knowing what came next. There was no forced entry anywhere in that apartment. No broken lock, no damaged frame, nothing pried or kicked. Irasema opened that door herself, at night, which means whoever was standing on the other side of it was someone she had absolutely no reason to fear. She did exactly what most of us would do for someone we believed we could trust. The next morning, on January 20th, Irasema's sister kept the plan they'd made on the phone. She drove her 17-year-old daughter, Linda Yesenia Valdez, to Irasema's apartment complex to spend the day with her aunt. She waited in the car until she saw her daughter get inside safely, then pulled away. About a minute later, her daughter came running back out of that apartment, screaming for someone to call the police. Inside, she had found blood across nearly every surface in sight, and her aunt unresponsive in the kitchen. Officers were called at approximately 8:51 a.m. Imagine being that young, experiencing a scene so devastating and carrying that mourning with you for the rest of your life. Imagine every January that follows, arriving with the same date attached to it, and knowing that every January would bring you back to the morning your life changed forever. By the time officers arrived, there was nothing left to say. Irasema was already dead. Crime scene investigators worked the apartment methodically, photographing every room, cataloging, swabbing anything that might carry biological evidence. And in the bedroom, on top of the TV stand, they found something small enough to miss and important enough to eventually break the entire case. A single fresh droplet of blood, roughly the size of a quarter. It wasn't Irasema's. Someone else had bled inside that apartment, probably without even realizing it. in the middle of the worst act of their life. At the time, nobody could have known that one tiny mistake would outlive 14 years of silence. There was one more detail. Irasema's television was missing. For a while, that pointed investigators toward a robbery. But nothing else fit that theory. Not the blood, not the footage of someone being deliberately let inside, not the total absence of forced entry. Somebody took that television, but nobody came there to steal it. That missing television matters more than it might sound. 14 years later, prosecutors would use it to elevate the charge. Police allege Irasema was killed during the commission or attempted commission of a robbery, which under Texas law is what turns a murder charge into a capital murder charge. This wasn't a break-in gone wrong. This was personal. Police released the surveillance footage publicly, hoping someone would recognize the figure at the door. Based on the build and posture on camera, investigators believed at the time they were looking for a man. The blood sample went to a crime lab, and the resulting DNA profile was uploaded to CODIS, the national database used to compare crime scene evidence against anyone ever arrested or convicted in the United States. But no match was found, and this was because the person who left that blood behind simply had no criminal history anywhere on record. And all the lab could determine from the profile itself was that it belonged to a Hispanic female, a detail that quietly contradicted the working theory investigators had built from the surveillance tape. In 2019, 7 years in, investigators tried something newer. They sent the DNA profile to Parabon Nanolabs, a company capable of generating a predicted image of a suspect's face directly from genetic markers, ancestry, eye color, complexion. Police released the resulting composite publicly, alongside a reward through Arlington Crime Stoppers, hoping a neighbor, a co-worker, anyone who had seen that face in person might finally recognize it. A predicted face, built from probability and genetic averages, still wasn't enough to isolate one specific woman out of hundreds of thousands of people across North Texas. This made the case go cold again. Not closed, just waiting. Years passed. Seasons kept changing. Irasema's niece grew from a 17-year-old into an adult. New families moved into Aspenwood who had never heard the name. And every January, the same anniversary arrived with the same unanswered question attached to it. So how does a killer who is on camera, whose blood is sitting in an evidence locker, and whose DNA profile is loaded into a national database, still manage to stay completely unidentified for over a decade? That's the most frustrating part of this story. Here's why CODIS was never going to solve it. That system works by comparing DNA directly against people already arrested or convicted somewhere in the country. A direct match, or nothing at all. It wasn't designed to search for relatives or build family trees. If the person who left that blood had never once been fingerprinted in her life, CODIS was never going to find her. Not in 2012, not in 2019, not ever. No matter how many times the sample was rerun. Detectives had done everything the technology of 2012 allowed. The evidence was there. The problem was that the science hadn't caught up yet. It would take a technique with no connection to finally do what 14 years of detective work couldn't. Now you might be wondering, how exactly do you identify a killer who has never appeared in any criminal database? Using nothing but a drop of blood and a genealogy website? In November 2024, Arlington's homicide unit made the decision that changed everything. Detective Tracy Dixon brought the case to the FBI's Dallas field office and requested help through their investigative genetic genealogy program, the same category of technique that has cracked some of the most notorious cold cases in the country over the last decade. Genetic genealogy works nothing like CODIS. Instead of searching criminal records, it compares crime scene DNA against public ancestry databases. the same ones ordinary people use to find long-lost cousins. It doesn't need the suspect to be a criminal. It only needs a distant relative of hers to have taken a DNA test. In April 2026, after well over a year of work, that approach finally produced something. But not directly. The FBI's genealogy team didn't match that blood profile to the suspect herself. They matched it to one of her relatives, someone whose DNA already existed in a public database, distant enough that connecting the two took real, painstaking work. From there, investigators built out a family tree, narrowing branch by branch, name by name, eliminating everyone who didn't fit by age, by gender, by geography, until one name was left standing: Mayra Velasquez. She was 42 years old now, 27 at the time of the murder. A licensed real estate agent with Pure Realtors, LLC, working the entire time she was, according to investigators, evading identification, living in Dallas. A work acquaintance later described her to reporters as kind and family-oriented, someone who had recorded millions of dollars in real estate sales and traveled abroad regularly to visit relatives, and said she was as shocked by the arrest as anyone who knew her would have been. She was married, with children. For 14 years, none of that raised a single question. She didn't flee the state. She didn't change her name. She didn't disappear from public life the way people assume a killer eventually will. She stayed exactly where she was, built a career people trusted her with, and became, by every outward account, genuinely well-liked. While one family counted anniversaries without answers, another family was building memories that, according to investigators, existed alongside a secret no one saw coming. Investigators finally had a name. What they didn't have was enough to arrest her. A genetic genealogy match, on its own, doesn't hold up cleanly in court. It's a lead, not proof. To move forward, detectives needed Velasquez's own DNA directly, collected without her knowledge, without a warrant, and without tipping her off before they were ready to move. So in May 2026, they began quietly watching her. For weeks, detectives followed her daily movements, learning her routine, waiting for a single specific moment. The moment she discarded something in public. That's the legal principle these cases turn on. A person can't be forced to hand over their DNA without cause. But the second they throw something away in a public place, they've abandoned it. And abandoned DNA can be collected legally, without a warrant, without consent, without them ever knowing it happened. The moment came at a local restaurant. Undercover officers watched Mayra Velasquez sit down for lunch with friends. They watched her eat, waited while lunch ended, saw her stand, gather her things, and walk out, the same way she'd likely done hundreds of times before, with no idea that the ordinary act of leaving a table was about to end 14 years of silence. The second she was gone, detectives moved in and collected everything she'd left behind: 2 plastic forks, a plate, and a cup. Those items went straight to a crime lab, where the DNA on them was compared directly against the 14-year-old droplet of blood recovered from Irasema Chavez's bedroom TV stand. And it turned out to be an exact match. 14 years of waiting had just been reduced to a single laboratory result. If this case is the reason you clicked, this is exactly what we do here. The cases where the answer took years, sometimes decades, to finally surface. Subscribing takes one tap, and it genuinely decides which cases we're able to cover next. On July 16, 2026, Arlington police arrested Mayra Velasquez in the nearby city of Hurst, Texas. She was charged with capital murder and transported to the Tarrant County Jail, where she is being held without bond. Investigators measured the exact distance between the two moments that now define this case: 14 years, 5 months, and 27 days between the night Irasema Chavez was killed and the morning her accused killer was taken into custody. Days later, at a press conference, Arlington Police Chief Al Jones confirmed what investigators had pieced together, and it reframed everything. Velasquez and Chavez weren't strangers. They had once been close friends. They lived only a few miles apart. And Velasquez, Chief Jones confirmed, had been inside that apartment before, more than once. Which explains the one detail that never made sense. Why a woman living alone opened her door late at night without hesitation? Why there was no forced entry? Why nothing about that footage looked like a struggle until it was already too late? She wasn't letting a stranger in. She was letting in someone she knew. But here's where it gets complicated. Days after the arrest, Irasema's sisters told reporters something that doesn't fit neatly with any of it. They had never heard of Mayra Velasquez. But the arrest affidavit describes the two women as very close friends. Irasema's own family says the name meant nothing to them, which raises a question nobody has answered yet. If they were as close as investigators say, why didn't the people closest to Irasema know she existed? Standing at that same press conference, Detective Tracy Dixon, who had spent years working this file, reportedly grew emotional describing the moment she finally got to call Irasema's family and tell them an arrest had been made. 14 years of silence, ending in a single phone call. For a detective who inherited a cold case long after the original investigators had moved on to other things, that call represented something rare in this line of work, an actual ending delivered in person to people who had stopped expecting one. So the question becomes, how does someone who once considered Irasema a close friend spend the next 14 years living a completely normal life a few miles away after taking her friend's life? And why did it take a discarded lunch and not a single tip in 14 years to finally force that answer out? Investigators believe Velasquez cut herself at some point during the attack. That's how her blood ended up on that TV stand in the first place. An almost accidental piece of evidence that would outlast everything else about that night. It's a pattern that shows up again and again in cases like this. The difference between getting away with something forever and being caught decades later often comes down to something the killer never even noticed happening. As for why any of this happened, police have been deliberately careful. The motive remains undisclosed. But what they have confirmed is that Irasema's cell phone contains information relevant to the relationship between the two women, details prosecutors are saving specifically for trial. As of this recording, no trial date has been set. Velasquez is represented by attorney Dustin Hoffman of Sellers Law Firm, and her defense team has been direct about how they intend to fight this. Their argument is essentially this: the friendship itself explains the evidence. Velasquez had been inside that apartment many times because the two women were friends, so finding her DNA there proves she was present at some point, not that she committed a murder. DNA, they argue, establishes presence, not guilt. They've also pointed to the surveillance footage, saying it appears to show a man leaving the apartment complex. Investigators have pushed back on that directly, noting that the bloody footprints left at the scene were small and appeared to belong to a woman or a small man. That disagreement, over a set of footprints and a few seconds of grainy video, is likely to sit at the center of this entire case when it reaches a courtroom. She has not been convicted of anything, and under the law she is presumed innocent until a jury decides otherwise. This is still very much an active case, which means some of the most important questions here, including what actually happened between these two women and why, may not have public answers for a long time yet. What is already clear is that Arlington's use of investigative genetic genealogy changed the course of this case forever. Years earlier, the department had successfully used the same approach to identify the suspect in a 1985 cold case. That investigation never led to an arrest because the suspect had already died, but it proved something detectives desperately needed to know, that even the oldest evidence can still have a voice. 14 years earlier, the technology simply didn't exist for detectives the way it does today. The answers were there all along, locked inside a single drop of blood, waiting for science to finally catch up. But behind every forensic breakthrough is a family that spent years living without one. Irasema Chavez came to Texas hoping to build a new life. She found new friends, a place of her own, and the freedom to live openly as herself. Those who loved her expected to watch that new chapter grow. Instead, it ended in a single night, leaving behind questions that followed them for more than 14 years. Justice, when it finally arrived, didn't erase 14 years of grief. It couldn't give Irasema's family back the birthdays they spent wondering, the anniversaries that reopened old wounds, or the ordinary conversations they wished they could have one more time. What it did give them was something they had been waiting on since January 2012, an answer. Speaking from Mexico after the arrest, Irasema's family said something that speaks volumes about who they are. While hoping their own loved one would finally receive justice, they also said they were praying for Mayra Velasquez's family. Even after everything, they understood that one arrest would forever change more than one family. This case wasn't solved because someone suddenly decided to tell the truth. It wasn't solved because the killer confessed. It was solved because investigators refused to believe that no match meant no hope. They kept the evidence. They kept asking questions. And eventually, science answered the one question that had haunted this case for more than a decade. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Cold cases don't stop hurting simply because they're old. Families don't stop waiting because years have passed. Time doesn't erase loss. It only changes the way people learn to carry it. If there's one thing Irasema Chavez's story proves, it's that justice doesn't always move quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. But as long as the evidence survives, hope survives with it. Thank you for watching Missing Hour. We'll continue following this case as it moves through the court system and bring you every major update, from hearings to trial, because the biggest questions in this story still haven't been answered. When they are, you'll hear them here. If Irasema's story stayed with you, consider subscribing. Share this story with someone who still believes cold cases can be solved. And let us know in the comments which case you think Missing Hour should dig into next.